All right. So, welcome everybody to the Busy Moms Book Club. You do not have to be a mom to join, and you also don't have to read the book to join, which is what's so fun about this book club. Today we're doing The Gap and the Gain. I'll introduce the book in just a second. But just a brief introduction to me. I'm Laura Johnson. I'm a certified life coach, and I teach moms how to discover and answer their calling, their purpose in life, while being the mom that they want to be. So I'm very passionate about what I do. If you've watched any of these past books, you're going to know that I love talking about books. I get giddy about books. So if you're joining us, I want you guys to go over to the chat box, and I want you to tell me if you have read the book or if you haven't. If you're watching the replay on this, you can always go back and comment, on the YouTube video as well. Tell me if you've read the book, what your thoughts are. So we say, I wanted to read it, but my library never got it. Okay, so this will be a perfect introduction for you. So the reason why I do this book club is to support busy moms. I know a lot of us have a passion for personal development, but sometimes being able to sit down and read a book can be really challenging. So what I like to do is all of you can come, you can hear about the book, you can learn about the book, and you can learn how to apply the book without ever reading the book. So that's kind of where it all came from. So I always start with a little game of you're in the right place if. So as we're going through and I'm going to share some of these things, I want you to go over to the chat box and tell me if any of these things resonate with you. Okay. And it'll make more sense as we keep going. All right. So you're in the right place if goals seem like a lot of work, like if it feels really hard to reach your goals. You're in the right place if there's some kind of measuring stick in your mind that you're never really like measuring up to. Another one, you're in the right place if everyone seems to have a secret sauce to where they reach their goals, but you don't. And it seems easier for them to reach, like they're much more naturally talented, oftentimes is what our brain says, or it comes easier to them. If you feel like you're always behind, if you're looking at friends, if you're looking at other people reaching goals, if you have your own business and you're looking at colleagues or entrepreneur friends where you just seem like you're behind whatever they're doing. You also know you're in the right place if you struggle to be happy right now and have a belief as soon as you get to somewhere in the future, you'll be happier. Oftentimes this will show up in like with your kids, it's hard to be present with your kids. Or if you're on a date with your partner and suddenly your mind is thinking about all your goals and all the things you should be doing. The last one is if you're in the right place if you struggle to see any of the progress that you've made right now and you don't think you reach your goals. This will often show up in feeling like a failure, feeling like you're stuck, and you can't move forward. Okay, so I want you to go over to the chat box. Tell me which one of those resonated with you. The reason why I really like this book, because as women, I believe we all have a divine purpose here on this earth. And when we're moving towards that purpose, everything changes in our world and we change the world. And part of that is achieving goals. Goals are an important part of that. And if goals always feel out of reach or really hard to reach, or if you're really struggling to be happy right now while you're achieving your goals, then this is the perfect book, The Gap and the Gain, because he teaches us why this happens. Okay, so let's see. You said fast air, maybe getting to goals feels more true for me. Okay, Sheridan, I want you to go over and explain a little bit more about that, okay? Because we want to make sure that as we're talking about this, we really answer this struggle that you have. Okay, so as we're going through, he talks. So what I like about this book, which I don't know if I've ever seen this before. Dr. Benjamin Hardy is the one that is writing the book for the creator of the concept, Dan Sullivan. So in the introduction, he talks about how Dan Sullivan knows his strengths and his weaknesses, and he knows that he's not a successful writer, but he has brilliant ideas. And this concept is very life-changing. So what he did is he teamed up with somebody that is a strong writer, and together they brought this book forward, which I think is a really cool concept. So what you're reading is Dan Sullivan's content from the view of Benjamin Hardy. Okay, so that's where you want to first get clear that who you're listening to is Dr. Benjamin Hardy. And he talks about two different concepts, obviously, I mean, from the title, the gap and the gain. So the way he first explains this is that anytime we are in the gap, we are feeling like our goals are really hard, or that we're moving towards our goals, but we're not celebrating any success. It's like we're always getting comfortable with that next thing, and the horizon is still out in the future. Okay, so the reason why this happens is he says that let me turn my marker so you can see it better. He said, we all have this ideal of what we want to create. But then there's a starting point, and then there's a point of things that we have achieved. Let me make sure. Let me turn that so you can hopefully see that a little bit better. Okay. So that says achieved. So ideal, achieved, and a starting point. So we're all visualizing, there we go. We're all visualizing this ideal. This is where we want to get to. But what we're measuring when we're working through is the difference between what we have achieved and what our ideal is. This is usually set on some other external standards, outside of us. Okay. So anytime we are measuring this difference from what we've achieved to our ideal, we are living in the gap. And he says what happens here is not only do we experience unhappiness, but we also experience guilt, frustration, depression, failure. All of this feels very heavy. Okay. I'm going to explain this again in another way in just a second so that we can really drill this home. Okay. So when he's talking about the gain, we have an ideal that we're striving for. We have a starting point. Okay. We're imagining this. And then we get to a point of things that we have achieved. Okay. When we measure what he says, measure backwards, meaning we're looking at, okay, it's going to spell that wrong if I kept talking. When we're measuring backwards, we're looking at the progress that we have made. When we're doing this, we are feeling happy for the moment. We are proud of ourselves. We are celebrating our successes. This is where we're living in the gain. And it's important to know what this feels like, okay? Because we're going to get really clear on how this shows up for every single person. Because once you know if you're in the gap or the gain, you'll know how hard or easy your goals are going to start becoming. So the way I imagine this also is to imagine, you're walking along, this path, okay, and you have these weights around your ankles, okay? So you're walking along, you feel these weights. It's very heavy, but you're still moving forward. That's what it feels like to move forward when you're in the gap, when you are measuring what you've achieved against your ideal. Oftentimes you'll still go forward. Now, the difference between living in the gap and what it feels like, when you're living in the gain is, okay, imagine as you're walking along, you no longer have weights, but you're also taking longer strides. Suddenly it feels lighter and more free to move forward in the things that you're working on. It's so interesting because I see this all the time. I see this all the time in my clients. Hold on. Where like I had a client tell me the other day, and I'll mention this again later on. She told me I was really good with time management. She's like, I am fantastic with time management. She's like, but suddenly I feel like I'm getting more things done and things are coming easier in the time that I already have allocated for it. And she's like, I don't understand why that's happening. So we had to stop and talk about this. Like, this is why it's happening. She got rid of the weight she had around her ankle. So yeah, she was great at time management, with the weight that she was carrying. But now that that's been released and she's more free and she's happier, suddenly things are coming so much smoother. And that's where, like, I always tell my clients, like, this is the magic. And so when you're living in the gain, it's not like we call it magic because it's hard to really explain until you're there, but it feels like magic, but you're creating it because suddenly you've dropped those weights and you're taking longer strides. You get to where you want to go a lot easier. So this is when I want you to we're going to go more into detail, but if there's any questions on this, please, go over to the chat box or unmute yourself. I want to make sure we answer any questions before we move on, because this will be the foundation to everything else that we learn from this book today. Okay, so I'm going to give you a chance to type while I erase this. Okay, so the first, part of the book, that was like the introduction to it. So the first part is understanding how to get out of the gap. So he kind of breaks it out into out of the gap and into the gain. And the first thing that he explains is the difference between wants versus needs. And this is really important to know for yourself, because what we think we need in order to be happy is what keeps us in the gap. Okay, so remember, the gap is measuring that ideal, like what we've achieved against our ideal. And the way he described, well, before I do that, got your piece of paper, pen, even if you have a phone, answer this like out loud if you're driving in your car. What are the things that you need in order to be happy? Okay. Now, I know for me, I'm really good with mental stuff and I know the answers. Like, I don't need anything. I'm happy right now. Okay. My brain will always say that first because I know it's the right answer. But if you're not fully happy, or if there's things that feel out of reach, or if you ever get into a hustly mentality, meaning you're sacrificing sleep, or you're sacrificing family time, or you have a lot of health problems that seem really annoying to you because it's keeping you from your goals. All of these are examples of symptoms that you're not fully present and happy right now. And I know that because I've done every single one of those things. Okay. So I want you to really ask this question to yourself and give yourself a moment to kind of like scan around and find an answer to it. What do you need in order to be happy? Okay, so when I was reading this book, so I started reading this book when I was in Disneyland. When was that? A month and a half ago. And I was surprised that and I truly am like very happy in my life. But one of the things that came up for me was I felt like I needed to lose weight. And that was one of those things that I thought, well, I can't fully be happy at a Disneyland pool because I've got an extra 15 pounds I'm carrying around. And it was so interesting how sneaky that was, because consciously I don't think that. But when I really gave my brain a chance to go there, I realized thought I would have a better experience at Disneyland if I had the extra 15 pounds already lost. Okay. So that's where I recognize that in that moment, I had been living in the gap. I had this ideal and I wasn't measuring up to this ideal. So then the next question I want you to ask is, who or what do you measure yourself against? And this was really interesting too. Again, going with this example, I realized I was measuring myself against just beauty standards. I have always been curvy. I have literally, like, I went from child body to woman body. There was no in between. And it was like, I literally grew hips and a butt overnight. And I recognized, especially at the time, that, back in the 90s and 2000s, where like stick figure was very much the shape and the shape of all of my friends, I felt very insecure about my body. But I've made a lot of peace with that. But in this moment, that's what I was measuring myself to, is I was looking around the pool and scanning all the bodies that were beautiful in my mind that didn't look like mine. Okay. Which is crazy that even after all the work I've done, that this still came up. And so I was able to watch it without, with curiosity, without really judging it. Okay. So in this moment, that's what I was measuring myself against. That was the ideal that I had. Okay. And in this moment, that's where I really started to question, what is it I want? I took myself out of the gap and I put myself in the gain. What am I proud of myself for having accomplished? I am so proud of myself for growing and birthing 3 children while having significant health problems. With my last pregnancy, I ended up in a wheelchair and really struggled to walk. Like I couldn't. I remember the first time I walked around the block, it was like this huge celebration for the whole neighborhood. They all knew I couldn't walk. And so I've been able to build up my strength. And so I was able to see, like, I am so proud of the progress that I've made and that I am so happy with the body that I have. And I honor it on a very different level now than I ever have before. And I want to build my strength, but not from a place of like I have to or there's some ideal. It's just something that I want to do. And I'm committed to that versus I need to and I'm attached and my life won't be happy until I get there. So this is the difference, to first move out of the gap is you have to recognize, what do you think you need in order to be happy and what ideals are you measuring yourself against? So then he goes on to explain that we're going to keep gap over here. He said there is something called obsessive passion. So there we go. Actually, we're just going to start over on that. Okay. Obsessive passion. Okay. So man, I'm really struggling with that word. Obsessive passion is where you start doing something, you start discovering a passion that you have, and it becomes very much an obsession to where that's where your joy comes from. You lose sight of other areas of your life because they don't bring you as much joy in the moment as this passion. Now, I'll give you an example of what I see this happen a lot. Not so much with my clients because I'm really aware of this, but what I see a lot in moms and in the mom industry is that once a woman finds like what that passion is, she will run towards it. And she will know, like, this is what I meant to be, and this is what I meant to do. And that's a very good thing. If she has not yet cleaned up the gap mentality she has about motherhood, she will lose sight of that. She will start doing the things that bring her passion and joy because the other stuff doesn't. Not saying she doesn't love her children, but who really wants to cook so many meals, clean up all the messes, do all the laundry, all the home managing stuff that sometimes comes with being a mom. I'm not saying that's being a good mom. Those are just part of home managing and taking care of a family that often I see with moms. Now, when this starts to happen, then she starts to feel very guilty. And when she starts to feel very guilty about that, like she's not being the mom she wants to be, she'll give up on her passion and just go back to being a mom. This is the push and pull that I see moms go through. It's exhausting and it's frustrating for them. And they don't understand that this is just a symptom of living in the gap mentality, that this is how it starts to show up. So what he also teaches, and when I say he, I'm talking about Dan Sullivan and again, Benjamin Hardy together. What he teaches is that we want to live in harmonious passion. And the way he describes this is that when you are in harmonious passion, this passion enhances. I liked that word that he used. I want to make sure I got the word right. Harmonious passion enhances every aspect of your life. And so I spend a lot of time, with my clients is recognizing when you're happy with where you are and you've cleaned up the stresses of motherhood and home managing and all of that, that's really that a lot of moms really struggle with. Once you've cleaned that up and you're living in the gain in that aspect, And once you start finding that passion and you start moving towards it, they all work together in this beautiful harmony where they all come and they support they support one another. And that's a really beautiful reality. And it's really cool to see when it starts to happen for people. So I want you just to check in with yourself, to really find out, are you working towards an obsessive passion as you're reaching your goals, as you're fulfilling your purpose, or are you working towards a harmonious passion? And you'll know, once you ask yourself and kind of test yourself a little bit, you'll be able to get really clear if you're living in the gap mentality, or if you're living in a gain mentality, based on asking yourself that. So then the next thing is, he said that he wants to start defining behaviors that exist here. So I think I don't know if I wrote down that quote where he talks about the way we the way we identify with ourselves. Maybe I did write it down. Maybe it was just in a different area. So I think he called it self-signaling, where the self-signaling is that we all have a way that we exist and we live in the world, but we can start shaping our identity based on the judgments we have regarding the behaviors we have. And so when we are living in the gap or the gain, then we start behaving in certain ways. And getting really clear on what our behaviors are is how we get out of the gap. Because the point is not to get rid of the gap. The point is to recognize when you're in it and how quickly you can move out of it. Because our brain will always go to the gap. It's the way it's programmed. We'll talk more about that in just a second. Okay, so what we want to do at this point, again, if you have a piece of paper and pen, you can even go over to the chat box and share what comes up to you. We want to get really clear on what are the behaviors that you do in certain areas. Okay, so when you're in the gap, so I'm gonna answer this for myself, but I want you to be answering this for you. Okay, I have studied myself for years now, and I know when I'm in the gap based on the way I behave. So one of those behaviors is I start to compare myself. I know I'm in the gap. I'm measuring against some ideal if I start comparing myself. Now this, I got really clear on this a couple years ago, to where I thought if I deleted social media, then I would stop comparing myself. You know what happened? I started comparing myself to strangers in the grocery store. Like, taking things out of our life, yes, can support us. But if we don't heal the mentality, if we're not clear on why we're doing something, it won't solve the problem. Our brain will find some other way to do it. Even if it's an imaginary ideal, even if we're imagining comparing ourselves to other people. Okay. So one of the things I do when I'm in the gap is I always compare myself. So again, I want you to go over and I want you to write this down for you. I want you to get clear in your behaviors. Another one, this is one of my very specific tells that I have, is I start pacing my house. And my heart, like I have an anxious heart, my heartbeat always will start to increase. Now, pacing feels very productive to my brain because I think I'm doing things, but it's not like just going up and down the hall. It's like taking one thing and moving it to another spot, and then going to that spot and taking something else and moving it. It looks probably to other people like I am cleaning, I'm being productive, but I'm not actually doing anything on my list. I'm just moving around a lot. I always know when I'm in the gap, when I start to pace or bounce around between things and I start feeling really anxious inside. And that's always a signal for me that I need to slow down and I need to do intentional work to get out of the gap. And we're going to talk about what that work is. Okay. So right now we're just learning behaviors. Another one is that I'll stay up way too late watching shows, and then I'll shame myself for it the next day. It's not like I just do it because I want to. I want to layer and then make myself feel bad about it. Super productive. Okay, so that's one thing that I know I'm living in the gap if I start doing that, because I'm avoiding things in my life. And then the other one that I recognize I do is I start getting really indecisive. I get stuck in indecision and I start to avoid my to-do list. So these are the behaviors that I've recognized for myself. Now, once I start seeing these, then I start moving and being really intentional about what do I want to do? What do I want to do to get out of this? Again, it's not to get rid of it, it's to lessen the amount of time that we're here. I will tell you that in the past, I had probably spent years in this and I had no idea. Now, when it happens, I might have a day, I might have an afternoon, and I'm able to work out of it. Sometimes, if things are really hard, it might be a couple weeks, but I have never spent the length of time that I used to being in this because I'm so clear on it now. That's where I want you to get to. Every single person can start learning these behaviors so clearly for themselves. It's really interesting. And I maybe have mentioned this before, but it's cool because I can start to see what my clients are doing too. I've got one client, she's always in the gap if she's in the bath watching Survivor. Every single time we're like, oh, we've moved back into the gap because you're in the bath. And so we've really had to get clear on that behavior for her. For somebody else, it might be snapping at their kids when they aren't really mad about anything. All of a sudden it will be like their kid just asks them something, then they like turn into the Hulk and snap. Okay. So get really clear on whatever that is for you, because every person has very specific behaviors they do. You can go over to the chat box, tell us an example of something that you've done when you're in the gap. And again, this is measuring, this ideal against like where you are right now. So then the other thing that we want to get clear on is what are the behaviors we're doing when we live in the gain. So one of the things that I recognize is that when I'm in the gain, I want to sleep. Like I actually want to go to bed. It's enjoyable to go to sleep and I look forward to it. It's not something I'm avoiding. The other thing that I recognize is I'm very calm and I'm grounded. And this shows up in the way that I make decisions. Like I can't say that I used to be, but now I'm a very decisive person. If I want something, I can make that decision and think very clearly about that. And I'm very strategic and intentional about the decisions I make because I'm living in the gain more often than I ever have in my life. And then the last thing, well, I mean, not the last thing, but another thing is I'm proud of myself. When we're living in the gain and we're measuring backwards, again, we're looking at the progress that we've made and we're able to celebrate and be proud of who we are right now. We are proud of ourselves. And this is a sure sign that you are living in the gain if you are celebrating and able to really recognize and communicate even the amazing things that you're doing at this point. So as he goes through this this is how you first recognize that you're in the gap. And in order to move out of the gap, you have to know when you're in it. You're increasing your self-awareness here. So then the next thing he says is at this point, we want to start moving into the gain more often. So go over to the chat box, tell me some of your behaviors if you'd like to, about, gap or gain. Any of the symptoms we're going to call it that you do if you're in one of those. Okay, as I erase this. All right. So he says, now we want to start moving into the gain. And in order to do that, we get to become self-determined, is what he calls it. When we're always looking to outside ideals for us, that's what he calls it. We're being externally motivated. That was the word. Yeah. Extreme. I can't say that. What? My mouth is just not working today. Yeah. We're just going to call it like externally motivated versus intrinsically. That's the word, extrinsically. There, I got it. My brain's working. So he calls it, so when you're in the gap, you're extrinsically motivated. There we go. And when you're in the gain, you're intrinsically motivated, which means you are determining for yourself how you are successful. So he said we get to start creating our own success and our own definition of success. And the way he does this for himself is he answers a specific question. He says, I know I'm successful when ... So he gives us a challenge in the book to find 10 things. Okay, so I'm going to offer you that same challenge is I want you to go all the way down to 10. Okay, whether you do this now or whether you do this later, this will change things for you, because what you're starting to do is you're moving into the gain by determining your own success and letting go of arbitrary ideals that just don't exist except in our own mind. So when you get to this point, then you get to start deciding if things align with this or if they don't. Okay. So one of the things, so I'll read just a couple of mine. I'm not going to write it down, but I'll just read it, for sake of time, what I have just written for myself, because I always take myself through these activities as well. So I know I'm being successful when I connect with my kids. That is one of my ideals. That's one of my priorities. That's one of my values. Even in my business, is I want to make sure I'm always connecting with my children. That is very important to me. So I know I'm successful then. I know I'm successful when I'm maintaining the systems of my home. For me, it's important to have a clean home, one that's functioning very well. And I realized for a long time when I was in the gap that I had these perfect ideals of what a clean home was. Everything had to be picked up every day. All the beds had to be made. Like there were all these like really rigid standards. What I realized was that was not healthy for me. And that's not how I defined success. For me, I think of my home as very cyclical. And I think about the systems within it that are cyclical as well. So yes, there are times where everything is picked up after I've reset the system. There are times where it's the middle of the week and things have been taken out and I haven't, and it's not scheduled for me to reset the system yet. And so it might appear messier, even though the bones of it are clean, if that makes sense. So for me, that's one of those things that I define my success is when I'm maintaining those systems versus giving up on them. I know that I know that I'm being successful when I'm sharing my genius with the world. And I think I've mentioned this before, like posting for me on social media has been one of my biggest challenges in my business. But yet there are things that I feel so prompted to share that like I can't hold it in anymore. And that for me was a really big turning point on when I started putting myself out there on a very different level, was when I started to trust what God was planting in my own heart. And I had to start sharing that with the world. Because that's what I was feeling. That's what God was prompting me to say. And that has really shifted. I know I'm successful when I'm trusting those promptings that are placed in my heart. Another one is that I'm honoring my body and its needs. Since I do have a lot of health, I've got a chronic pain disorder. I mentioned with my pregnancies, like there's just a lot of physical things that happen in my body that I feel great the majority of the time when I'm caring for my body, and my body can do amazing things. But if I'm not taking care of it, I'm not being successful and my body will start to shut down. It's this really cool superpower that I have. And so what he continues to say is that you have to get really good at saying no to things that misalign with how you define success. So for me, I recognize that there are times that are just easier for my body to go out and have a girls' night. Even when I really want to, I can feel if my body, if it's one more thing that's just going to tip it over the edge, I know it's not something that aligns with my success. And oftentimes I will say no to those based on how my body feels. Sometimes I say yes, based on how my body feels. And so it made it very easy to have this filter in order to say yes or no to things. And so that's where you really want to start getting clear on how do you measure success for you, and then start using that as a filter for when you say no or yes in your life. So that's the first step in moving into the gain, is defining your own success, being self-determined, he says. The next he talks about is understanding the compound effect of the gap and the gain. And I saw this image drawn a long time ago. at an event that I was at, and it's just always stayed with me. So think about this as the gain and this as the gap. He talks about oftentimes when we're in the gap, um, it can become a habit. It's just the way that our brain starts to function. It becomes very easy to stay on this path right here, but suddenly you'll end up down here where there's just a turning point. Now, what happens is when we're living in the gain, we may not see a difference yet, but suddenly the longer we stay with it, suddenly there's like this exponential growth that starts to happen. And he said the best way to get out of this gap down here to jump back up is through gratitude. Now, part of me cringes when people say gratitude is the solution, because as Christian women, what I see a lot is that we can use gratitude against ourselves. And I call this negative gratitude. I should be more grateful. I have a really good life. I shouldn't complain. I should. There's all these shoulds. That's what I call negative gratitude. That is not what he is talking about. What he is talking about is the practice of I am. Okay. Versus, we'll put it over here, I should. You'll be in negative gratitude if there's some kind of I should in there. You're practicing true gratitude if you are saying, I am grateful for this. Okay. And it doesn't have to be like that, but it's just it's a sense of being versus a sense of like shaming. And that's how you'll really know. The other thing that is really important to recognize is that when we're practicing gratitude, it's not toxic positivity. You can still honor what you're feeling. You can still be sad. You can still go through those emotions. But again, knowing the difference between your behaviors, the gap and the gain, is you're going to start recognizing when you have moved from processing an emotion to indulging in an emotion. And I can really see that. Like, I know that when I'm processing emotion, I'm not in the gap. I can still be in the gain. All hell will break loose. I will be in my closet on the floor crying, but suddenly it feels like the clouds will part. Okay. That's still me living in the gain. When we're in the gap, I'm feeling emotion and I'm eating all the cookies in the house. I'm indulging in that emotion. That's where I've moved back into this gap. And so I wanted to just mention that, just to be clear for every single one of us, is that when we're having a practice of gratitude, I don't even like saying an attitude of gratitude, but like a practice of gratitude where we can still feel something and we can be grateful for very specific things that we truly do believe. That's when we can really start using gratitude for our benefit so that we remain in the gain for longer. We can move ourselves out of the out of the gap and into the gain. So please let me know if you have questions on that. Sorry to get on my little soapbox there for a second, because to me, that is such an important concept to make sure we get right. So what he says is that in that moment, you can start practicing gratitude by writing down just a couple things that you're grateful for. So I did this many years ago. It was after the birth of my second baby, and I had postpartum depression really bad. And I was really trying to practice gratitude for the things in my life. And it was hard for me to write down 3 things or 5 things. I don't remember how many it was, but one of the things I did do that was really fun is that I wrote down each person and pet because I was feeling like my pets were a burden on me at the time. And I didn't want that because I love them. So I wrote down each person and pet, and I wrote down something I was grateful for that day that they did or part of who they are. And I included myself in that list. So it's still even fun to go back. So you can change up your gratitude practice, make it work for you, because that will help you stay in the game. So then the other thing that he says is in order to get in the gain, we have to measure backwards. And we mentioned this a little bit just a second ago. Backward. So he talks about measuring backwards. He said the brain's natural state is to forget the progress that it's made. The reason why it does that is because once it moves something, so up here's our prefrontal cortex, and back here's like our subconscious. And it always wants to move things to the subconscious because it then becomes on repeat. We don't have to think about it. So if you imagine for a second, like if you were just to go from your bed to your bathroom, if you literally saw every single thing, door jamb, doorknob, the size of the door frame, like your brain would be overwhelmed. It would be so consuming, it would shut down. But our brains are fantastic. They filter all of that out. It is programmed to do that. The struggle with that is when you're looking at the progress you've made, it slowly, well, not even slowly, sometimes it's very quickly, it will adjust to the new normal that you have. So even if you've made progress, your brain will still be looking at that ideal and thinking, oh my gosh, I have so far to go, instead of look how far I've come. Now this is my new normal, and I can celebrate that while remembering where I came from. And so he teaches that this is a 4-step process that our brain goes through. And in the book, he uses an example of potty training with his kids. I want to use something that might be a little more applicable, at least for me. It kind of, when I thought about it, it rang true a little bit more. So the first he talks about is unconscious, and I think I spelled this like 4 different ways in my notes. Unconscious competence. Okay. So the first one is like, I don't know, I don't care. Like we're completely oblivious to our ignorance and we don't care about our ignorance. So I thought about this in the example of learning how to drive. When we were young children, our parents drove us and that was completely fine. We didn't care. We didn't want to drive. It wasn't even on our mind. Okay, that's unconscious competence. Don't know, don't care. The next, and I'm just going to do UC, so I don't have to spell that every time. Oh, sorry. The next one is conscious competence. No, that doesn't, it's unconscious, excuse me. Unconscious competence. Now I'm going to have to go back and check these in the book because now I'm worried I'm telling you wrong. Okay, so this is don't know, but do care. Oh, I think I know what I did. It's incompetence. Excuse me. I'm just messing you guys all up. So it's unconscious incompetence and then conscious incompetence. There we go. Don't know, don't care. So this is when you kind of get to the age where you're starting to look forward to driving, where suddenly you start to think, okay, it's going to happen. I don't know how to, but I do care. Like at some point I want to learn this. I want to go out with my friends. And then comes the point where it's conscious competence. Suddenly you start learning how to drive. So you do know and you do care. It takes a lot of work. So when you're first learning how to drive, you're thinking really clearly, okay, I've got to be looking all around. I can't be distracted. The music can't be off. The friends can't be in the car anymore. Like you're very intentional as you're going through the motions and you're practicing over and over and over. But then you get to a point where you're unconscious competent. Okay. And this is where you do know how to do something, but you don't really care. It just becomes like second nature to you. So now you get into the car with your kids, with friends, whoever, and you drive almost like it's just on repeat. Like you don't even have to think about it. This is how like your brain will always try and move things to this unconscious competence where it doesn't have to think about something. This is where it feels like it's most successful. But when we get to this spot, we forget where we came from. We forget how hard it was the very first time we were learning how to drive and how much brain energy it took to get to that point. So what he's talking about is when we get to this, we start to take our progress for granted. This is why we forget to celebrate our progress and we forget where we've been. So the biggest thing he says when we get to this point is we have to write down our progress. So he first explains this when you're moving your brain to to this spot and really starting to celebrate these wins. He says to start with looking 10 years ago. Where were you 10 years ago? What were you focused on? How were you measuring your success? And how have your situations changed? And so that was a fun activity for me. And I would, again, challenge each of you to do that, is to go back and think about who you were 10 years ago and the things that you were focused on. I was finishing school. I was having my first baby. I was getting my first like big kid corporate jobs. Like those things were really big and really important to me. And while becoming a mother and being completely overwhelmed and scared by all of that and navigating motherhood and work and all of those things for the very first time, and thinking there is no way on the planet I would ever have more children. This is the worst. It is so hard. But then to see how far I've grown, and to see like how easy those things become now, and really taking time to write that down and to celebrate it. So he says, break this down into a couple different pieces, break it down into the last 10 years. Then he says, break it down into the last 3 years, what you've learned in the last 3 years. And then break it down into the last 90 days. And then he talks about how one of the things you can do is really create a daily practice for yourself of seeing the progress that you've made. And I thought, this would be like, I'll share mine with you. Because this was really important for me to do, because yesterday was kind of a harder day. I had kids home from school. So I was juggling work and I had my sick kids that were home, and I was trying to figure out how to do both. My husband was out of town. I wasn't feeling the greatest. And so it just felt like a not very, it felt like a very gap day as well. It did not feel like a gain day. But when I sat down and I really looked at my progress, I was really proud of myself. So one of the things that I did, so write down your 3 wins every single day. So one of the things I did was I rescheduled one of my client calls. I have one very early in the morning. She's on a different time zone, and I love that call. It's like one of my favorite times during the week, and I never reschedule that call, but I needed to this week. And I was really proud of myself for honoring what my body was feeling and what my family needed in the moment. So I rescheduled. Then something happened in our yard. We're doing a bunch of projects in our yard, and I've got a whole team that I'm managing out there and all the different things. And I went out and they completely did something wrong. Like, oh no, we were on totally different playing fields when I explained that. I don't know how we were on totally different playing fields. And I was in the past, I would have said, okay, we'll just figure it out. We'll make do. And this time I was really able to effectively communicate, like, I really appreciate the work you're doing. It's not what I need for this particular thing. And we had to go back and change a couple things. And I was really proud of myself for communicating that, because in the past I would have just like not said anything and tried to be the peacemaker. For my mind, that's one of the thoughts that I used to have, is I couldn't communicate things I wanted. I needed to be a peacemaker. So then the last thing that I recognized was that there was a bunch of changes in our plans based on my husband was flying in from a different state, and he had left his charge cord, and he was freaking out about it because he's at this new job and all the drama. And so I was able to clearly think, okay, how can we get this charge cord? It wasn't at a bunch of the stores that were around us. I needed to think very quickly and clearly before the stores closed and before I needed to put kids to bed. And we were able to solve it, and without any drama. And all the kids were fantastic and well behaved through trying to find this cord for dad. And so it was great, because those were wins that I had, that on a day where I felt like I was in the gap, I could go back and see all of the times that I was in the gain, because I intentionally thought, like, what were my wins? What were the things that I did succeed in? And I was able to write that down. So that's where I want to leave you. There's one last thing that I wanted to read. Let's see. So this is just, we have actually, So I wanted to tell this. So the last thing that he mentioned is that we can take any experience that happens to us, and we can utilize it for our gain. We can live in the gain. And I really liked the way he explained this because I've really struggled with that in the past within the Christian mentality that everything happens for a reason. And I think it's important for us to recognize that for some people, that might be a helpful thought. For many people that have experienced trauma, that's not always a helpful thought. In the past, sexual abuse in my childhood, that was very harmful to me to say everything happens for a reason because no child should be harmed. But what I liked is the way he talked about how even in a hard struggle, we can still live in the gain and not live in the gap. And so I'm just going to read this last little part. He says, he was talking about a friend that had very traumatic after, many traumatic experiences. He said, this friend had since come to the realization that there isn't an inherent meaning in things. Looking for a meaning is fruitless and leads you nowhere. Looking for a meaning puts you in the gap because it inevitably leads you to compare your situation with someone else, creating feelings of either superiority or inadequacy. He said, instead of looking for meanings, his friend, Richie, believes it is on each of us to create the meanings of the events and experiences in our lives. And so I really liked that is because it's up to us to decide what the meaning is. I think it's so important for us to, like, for me, one of the questions I will always ask myself is, where is the gift in this? How can I utilize this for my learning? Those questions are very different than what's the meaning? Why is God torturing me? Like, that's where my brain used to go. And so I wanted to leave you with that is that we can live in the gain even in hard experiences. We can decide what it means to us, and we can decide how to utilize it for our good and for our growth and for our benefit. So that's where I really wanted to leave with the book. I really appreciated that he kind of had that one last, exclamation point on this, because it's very hard for a lot of us to kind of figure those things out. But we can still allow God to heal us and allow us to use it for our gain. Sometimes that's hard, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to learn from a frustrating situation. You're right. It sometimes takes time, and sometimes we don't see it until after the fact. I'll share just really briefly in our last minute, an experience I had recently. That I've shared on social media, so you've probably seen it. Like I mentioned, my pets are my babies, and this particular cat that I had, she was the one that was with me while not being able to get pregnant for the last couple of years. She was my baby. And she recently went missing, literally up and vanished basically into thin air. And I've been really upset about it, really, legitimately mad. And I couldn't see what is the gift in this. And I finally, I gave space that, I don't have to know the gift right now. And I just allowed it to just be frustrating and to be mad. And it's been about a month. Well, probably, gosh, I mean, it's been over a month, but maybe about a week ago, I just had this beautiful thought that came to me that I feel like God really placed in my heart, was that every time I go to church right now, when I go into the neighborhood, I don't know my neighbors. I don't know my church congregation really well because we haven't been in this area for that long. And everybody is asking about this cat. Even on social media, people are still reaching out and asking me about my baby. And I have really felt held through all of this, and I've been able to see and connect with people that I probably wouldn't have otherwise. And that I was able to be vulnerable about this situation, and that they were able to show up and to love me through the situation. That truly has been a gift to me and has helped connect me to neighbors that I probably wouldn't have known otherwise. And so that's where, for me, I really, honestly, whatever you're experiencing right now, sometimes you just have to give yourself space to not see the good in it right now, not see the gift, and just be mad about it. And that's okay too. And trust that God will help show you that when the time is right. So I don't know if that brings any peace to you, but it is very challenging when we're in these frustrating situations, to honor what we're feeling, but know that when the time is right, we'll be able to see that gift. Okay. So you're welcome on that. And then, so Sheridan said that she had to get going. So, all right. So I do have, maybe 5, 10 more minutes. Of course, I want to honor your time as well. So we're going to finish the book club. Let me tell you just real quick, our next book will be The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. I actually really like this book for reasons that are kind of odd, which is why I wanted to do the book. And so when we were reading this book, I want you to look beyond just the cleaning tips. I want you to look at like the essence of the book. I know that sounds kind of silly, but so much of what she teaches applies to many aspects of our life, of really finding things that bring us joy. Excuse me. And I believe that's how the things she teaches also supports how we live in the gap, which is very cool. So we are going to be doing this month, or for this next month, and I'm excited to share that with you. And yeah, so I'm going to stay on. Does anybody, I always want to like leave a couple minutes. If anybody has something they want coaching on, we've got, 5, 10 minutes, or if not, we'll just wrap up. So you're welcome to unmute yourself. You can go over to the chat box. So I'll just give you a second to do that. I'm going to take a drink really fast. All right. I'm always worried about somebody like typing something and I never want to leave. Okay, so I'm going to give just 2 more seconds. I'm going to tell you the exact date for our next one. Okay, so our next book club. All right, so I don't think but I'll leave it open for just 2 more seconds. So our next book club is April 28th, and that's when we are doing the life-changing magic of tidying up. But just so you're aware, I do have a workshop planned for April 14th. That's our goals workshop. If you weren't able to attend that before, or even if you want to attend it again, please feel free to. That's going to be one of my regular ones I do each month. I will always leave time at the end for coaching on any coaching you have with regards to your goals. And then the following week, I believe, the 21st, I'll double check. We're going to also do how to discover your calling. So what I'll probably do in the next, couple weeks, I want to do a focus group where I would love your opinion on a couple things. So I will be launching a podcast soon, which I'm really excited about in the next couple months. But I've got to really hone in on a name, and I'm trying to find something that really speaks to my people. And one of the things I'm worried about, so I often talk about like our calling, like what we feel called to do, but I don't know if that's the specific wording that speaks to people. If maybe like the word like purpose, if that speaks more like finding our purpose. So that's where I'd love to do a focus group. I'll send an email out if you'd be willing to do that focus group. I will definitely make it worth your time. We'll add in some extra coaching or, something. So that, because I would love to hear from you on if that wording, like, and you can even go over to the chat box, if that wording calling speaks to you, or if there's something else, like I talked about in my last workshop, how some people call it their personal legend. If you're looking at Disney movies, Frozen 2, she talked about a secret siren that kept going off in her. A lot of people call it like their full potential, their purpose. So that's where I'm really trying to hone that in. So when I create that name for the podcast, it will speak very clearly. So that's where we're at right now. So a couple dates for you, couple things. And yeah, I guess we'll just pick up next month and be on the lookout in your emails, and you'll see when all of that comes. So have a wonderful rest of your day. I love you all very much, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.